Okay, so we are now going to ask you the survey question. So hopefully this will now appear on your screen. We'd like to know if you have any experience creating modules in Tosca Test Suite. So have you actually used and created modules already? So if you could click this, the idea is this will give us an idea of how experienced you are, and we'll be able to therefore tailor a few things to make it, if you've all got huge amounts of experience, we can just slightly change the content. So I'll give you a few more seconds. There's just a few of you left to vote. We can see how many have and how many haven't. Excellent, thank you. Now I will close the poll and I will share the results. So in actual fact, we can see that most of you have created some modules, but there is a fair percentage of you who haven't. So we will tailor that accordingly. So thank you very much. And we will now start. So let's start with the main question of the day. There we go. So what is a module? So Tosca uses module-based testing. Sorry, Tosca uses model-based testing. Apologies. We scan an application and we create a model representation of the app within Tosca. And the way that we do this is we use modules. These modules can be added to test cases to make test steps, and we can reuse them over and over again. The reusability is a key feature. You don't have to keep rewriting and redoing your modules every time that you need to do a different test case. So next, what is a module as such? So when we automate an application, we try to steer the application. In order for Tosca to know where to steer the application automatically, we must first tell Tosca where to go. Where is it clicking? Where is it entering text? Where is it doing its work? This requires both technical and business information. Technical information is the programming details within the system under test. So what's under the hood, how it is made up technically and created within the system. And then business information. Business information is the relevant processes and workflows, as well as the corresponding business data. For example, in our system under test, the demo web shop, which you might be familiar with and which we will be using today, the business information would be credit card information, the items that we're purchasing, the blue jeans, the digital downloads, etc., etc. So that's what a module is. We also have module attributes. So using Tosca XScan, which is one of the ways that we create modules, and the main way we'll be showing you today, the pages are scanned. This collects the technical information, and this information is saved in elements which we call modules. Modules can be reused again and again when steering a screen or part of a screen. For example, one user may use the web shop to purchase blue jeans, while another purchases a computer. Modules for the login, shopping cart, payment and shipping pages could be reused in both of these cases, since the technical information stays the same for these pages. In addition to modules being used in multiple test cases, they can also be used multiple times within the same test case. For example, if a menu at the top of the website stays the same for all pages of the site, one module containing all the controls in that menu can be used every time the menu items are used, regardless of the website page. Now within a module, the controls, the text boxes, the representations of the individual controls of an application are called module attributes. You'll see more of these later when Sarah goes into some details of how to create a module. But you'll be able to see they're all graphically represented so that you know that a checkbox, a tick box is a tick box, etc. When you save your modules, you should save them into a suitable folder. We recommend that you save them into a folder which describes the area of the application that you are working on. So for example, if it's a page regarding products, you would save it in a products folder, and all of the products folder was there. However, next, in 2 weeks' time, we will be discussing a whole wide range of the best ways of folderizing, organizing, setting up your project in the next MOOC. So we'll contain more information on that. Okay, so let's look now at the actual business end, and let's look at controls, modules, creating a module, and here's Sarah.
Hi guys. Okay, so I'm going to actually go ahead now and switch into Tosca itself because I'm going to walk you through actually the creation of modules, and I'm going to primarily be focusing on the 5 different methods of identifying controls in the XScan using our HTML sample application. So for those of you who might not be familiar with the application, it's a simple web shop where customers have login data and can order products and manage their data. Okay, so let me switch to Tosca. All right. So what you have here, most of you or many of you should be familiar with it. And for those of you who aren't, here is our module section. If you see on my screen, I have already pre-scanned modules which represent different pages and parts of the sample application. I've organized them into folders, and these folders, as Tony said, are structured basically by section or process in the web shop. So I have, for example, navigation elements, which you can find on all pages, all modules related to customer processes, all modules related to product and product selection. And so, as Tony said, we're going to actually be covering organization in 2 weeks. So right now, I'm going to focus on creating a module. And I'm going to be actually scanning the demo web shop. Okay, so I'm going to be scanning the customer login page of the demo web shop. Some of you may be familiar with this page from some of our training courses. Okay, so the first step for scanning is I have to right-click on the module folder where I want the module to be located. So in this case, I already have a folder called Login Page. I right-click, and I select Scan Application. And from here, I can select the technology that I plan to scan. I'm working in Tosca 9.3 right now. So I'm going to be scanning an HTML browser application, so I'm going to select Browser. And just give Tosca a second to react and open up the scan. Okay, so here you can see the XScan's opening, and what Tosca is doing is it's looking for my browser, and it's finding all open tabs in my browser. I have Chrome tabs open as well as Internet Explorer, as you can see. In order to scan Chrome or Firefox, you have to enable that scan and update the scan, so I don't have the Chrome add-on updated, but it's okay because for this particular course I'm going to be showing you just a scan of Internet Explorer. So I can go ahead and I will double click on the tab that I want to scan, which is my demo web shop, which you can see now in the background in case you've not seen it before. Okay. Actually, sorry, I scanned the wrong page. I'm going to have to do a new scan because I want to scan the login page. So what you saw was I had scanned the page, realized that I had selected the wrong page. I can, without having to close it and rescan, go to XScan on the tab and just select New Scan. And now it finds the new page, which I switched to. and everything's okay. Okay, so on this page, I'm going to be selecting this section in the center, which contains all of the controls that the user would need to steer to log in. For example, an email text box, a password text box, the login button. Okay? So what the XScan does, you can see here, first it shows me in the center of the XScan screen all visible business controls that Tosca could find on this page. Business controls here mean links, text boxes, buttons, radio buttons, and labels. If you look in the top of the XScan page, I have a filter and search section, and I have a slider in the center, and the slider allows me to change the level of detail of controls that I can see in my XScan. For example, if I slide all the way to the left, then Tosca shows me only the controls which I have currently selected. Right now, I haven't selected anything except the page itself, so the root of the module. And this root is also where the name of the module derives from. So best practices is actually to rename the root of the module so that when I save it, the name is meaningful to me so that I know what the module represents. In this page, it's the login page. So I can go ahead and rename it now. And that means when I save my module, and you can see it also changed in the top of the XScan page itself, now I know that the module will be actually called login page. Again, if I slide the filter one to the right, I see all visible business controls that Tosca found on the page. If I slide one more to the right, so I'm in the center now of the slider, I can see all business controls, both visible and not visible. So for example, I have computers, desktops, notebooks, and accessories here. If you look in the blue ribbon, I only have computers and then electronics. So where does this desktops, notebooks, and accessories come from? Well, if I hover my mouse over computers, I can see that there are invisible controls that are on the page. So links that were not visible immediately, but that Tosca found with the scan as being present but not visible. If I filter one more to the right, I can now see all visible controls, business and non-business, and also the invisible business controls. So for example, not only do I see links, text boxes, and buttons, I also see containers, list items, different HTML items which are used for structural purposes in HTML and organizational reasons. Okay, and the final slide to the right, the most detailed view of my controls, just shows me all possible items, including meta and script HTML information. Okay, so I'm going to filter out a little bit. What else do I have on here? I also, you can see, have select on screen and mark on screen. Select on screen, if I click it, allows me to hover my mouse over the controls, and I can actually manually click on the ones that I want. So with UI, obviously, it makes sense that I would want to click on the controls that I see I want. Notice that not only do I just get business controls like text boxes, but I get the containers that are visible. So this div container, which actually is a structural element that contains all of the controls in this area. If I want to remove these containers from showing up in my show on screen or select on screen, I can actually click on business controls only. And when I do this, I'm able to just select these business controls. So again, buttons, text boxes, links, radio buttons, and labels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select as I said, all of the controls that I think would be important, that would be steered by a user on the login page. Okay, so I can select them right there on the screen, and I'm going to press done. You may wonder why I've now only selected the controls in the center of the page and not in the surrounding areas. Our rule of thumb is one module for one screen, one module for one page. The only exception to this are controls which can be found on multiple pages. So all of these buttons on our web shop, all of these links, can actually be found on every single page of the web shop. So I'm going to scan them separately because for the login page specifically, the only specific controls to the login page are these that I've now highlighted in red. Okay, so all of these other controls will be scanned separately because they'll be reused in another way. But otherwise, one page for one module, so all login controls for one login page module. Okay, let's go back to the XScan and take a look at a little bit more of what's going on in here. By default, Tosca scans now for the properties, the technical properties of these controls. These can be found now on the right side of your XScan. There are some that show up automatically. I can also select Load All Properties. And I get then an extensive list of all the properties that Tosca found for these controls. So each one has its own properties. For example, the email text box contains all of this information, including representation properties like its coordinates on the screen, whether it's visible or not visible, enabled or not enabled, and all technical properties such as its ID, its inner text, its tag. And you can see that despite all of these properties having been found, only a few are ticked. These are ticked because the selected properties are those that will be used for identification by Tosca when it's steering this particular control. So it won't look for all of the properties. It will look for only those that we've selected. These are the control's own properties. You can see in the top that I have identified by properties highlighted. So Tosca knows to look for that control's own properties. And this is the most stable way of identifying a control is by its own properties. Okay? So the number one way to identify control is by its own properties. Okay? And you can see that by identifying it by its own properties, in this case, we received the notification that the control is uniquely identifiable. That means Tosca, according to the properties we selected, in this case ID and tag, is unique on that page, and it knows exactly to steer this text box. Before I move on, I have to make sure that all of the controls have names that are meaningful, so that when I save the module and maybe it's reused by other people, that they know what that control was. So in this case, I have a tick box called true. I might not know even now what that was, what was the tick box true. I can select mark on screen. And mark on screen highlights the control in red on the screen. So I know where that tick box is, and it shows me. So, for example, any of the controls I click then will be highlighted in red. So I know that the true tick box is the remember me tick box, and I can go ahead and rename it with a meaningful name. Okay? So once I'm done, I have everything I need. All of my controls are identified. I can click Save. I receive a notification in the bottom right of the XScan window alerting me that the module has been saved, and I can go ahead and close the XScan. And I'll quickly jump back into Tosca. And you can see that in my login page folder, I now have my module, which I created, and all of the controls I selected inside of it. If I focus on the module itself and go to the Properties tab, I can see that the module is identified by all of these properties by Tosca. And you'll also notice that there's a title property. The title property is actually the name of the page that we scanned to get this module. So this name came from actually the caption at the top of the browser tab. Okay, so when I'm on this login page, it's called Demo Web Shop Login. As Tony mentioned, we use model-based testing. So it uses this model and then searches for these properties to find the module and then the controls. So first, when I try to steer using this module, Tosca looks for this module on this page. When it finds the page, it then moves on and uses the properties of the controls themselves to find the controls on the page. Each control also has its own properties, and you remember that just now I selected ID and tag to identify the email text box, and here you can see that those are now the properties being used by Tosca to identify that text box. Okay, and hopefully now, because everything was uniquely identified, we should have no problems steering these controls. What happens when items cannot be uniquely identified? Are there other ways that we can identify them? The answer is yes, and we're going to, I'm now going to show you the 4 additional ways that we can identify them using the XScan. So I'm also now going to scan that black ribbon at the top of the web shop, which contained the product choices, the product tabs. So once again, I click on the folder where I want to include this module. I right-click and select Scan Application. I'm going to be, again, scanning my browser. Okay, the XScan opens. It takes a second because it's scanning Chrome and Internet Explorer. I'm going to be scanning the same page, so I double-click. And this now bar at the top, this ribbon at the top, these are the links that I want to select. Remember that even though it's on the same page, I said it's important that I scan these separately because I want this collection of links to be able to be used on every page in the web shop, not just the login page. Okay, so I showed you an easy way, if I already know exactly which controls I want to select, to select them, and that is select on screen. I'm also going to search for business controls only, and I can see that these are all links, which are business controls. So I'm going to just take all 7 of these links in the top ribbon. Okay, so all 7, and I'll click Done. Okay. So if you had the question, do I have to always check on each control to see whether it's uniquely identifiable? The answer is no, because as soon as I scan it, I receive, or it gets highlighted in yellow, and I also have this message at the bottom letting me know that this particular control is not unique according to its properties. So let's take a look and try to figure out why it's not unique and if we can fix it. By its own properties, we know that Tosca only selects a couple. In this case, inner text and tag. So maybe I'll try to select a couple of other properties. For example, the href visible equals true, the outer HTML, and for some reason, none of the properties are allowing it to be uniquely identified. If I take a look at the page, I can see actually that there are two links that are both called books. Okay, that's interesting. So I'm going to actually select the other link. And if you take a look at the first link's properties, and then take a look at the second link's properties, you probably didn't even notice a difference. And that's because both links were given all of the same technical properties when they were created. So Tosca can't find a way to uniquely identify them. So I don't need that second link anymore. So now it's not sufficient to use the item's own the control's own properties to identify it. For that reason, I have to now go to my second method. So the first method, remember, was its own properties. And now I move on to method 2, and that is parents' properties. Okay? So I need to find a parent element for this control, and if its parent can be identified, then I hope I'll be able to use it to identify the subcontrol. So, in case you don't know what I mean, I'm going to show you. With the control selected, I'm going to filter to the right until I see a more detailed view of the tree. And all of these controls, the above books, you can see, are actually its parent elements. They are parent elements because in the tree they actually contain the link books. So this list item, for example, here, LI, contains the link books. This UL contains actually all of these list items, which contains all of the links that I want to select. So I could take the list item for each link, or if I know that there's a parent that can be used for all links, I can also try that. So a little bit of this is trial and error because you want to try to find the best, most stable way to identify the controls. Because I know that this UL is the parent control for all of these links, I'm going to select it, and I will now try to make it uniquely identifiable. Okay? So I can look at its properties, and I see that it has the technical property class name top menu. I can assume logically that there's probably only one section of items on this page called top menu, and that the other books link, for example, would be something else, not the top menu. So if I use this for identification, I can see that this container becomes unique. And if you were watching on the left-hand side of the screen, you saw that all of the yellow highlighting disappeared because all children controls of this unique container have now become unique because of their link to the parent. Okay, so let me show that one more time. Without the class name being uniquely identified, then these will still not be unique. And as soon as I uniquely identify the parent, then all of the controls are unique. Okay, what happens if the parent is no longer uniquely or cannot be uniquely identified? If there's no item exactly above the control on the tree that contains that control. I can also identify controls by what's called an anchor. Okay, so this is now method number 3 of identification. Anchor control. An anchor control is any other control on the page. It need not be apparent. It need not be contained in the same element as this, as my target control. It only needs to be on the same page somewhere in the tree. And what Tosca does is try to find the target control's relation to that anchor in the tree. Okay, so for example, I see in the tree that there's a search button. It's close to it. I select it, and oh, great. So this search button is uniquely identifiable. I'm going to try to anchor it now to my books link. Okay. To anchor the control, I select Identify by Anchor in the identification section on the top of the XScan. When I select this, I get an Identify by Anchor pane on the right-hand side. With the control, the target control selected, so the books link, I now drag over the anchor control, in this case my search button. Okay? It tells me that the target control was successfully identified because of this anchor, and the anchor control I know is unique. And now what Tosca does is it searches for the book link in relation to the OK button or the search button in the tree. For example, it might say, look for the first link just below the search button in the tree. This is less stable than a parent control because since these two are not related to each other directly, if this search button actually moves somewhere in the tree, then this link might not be right near it, versus its parent, which we know it will fall directly inside of. It has to be inside of its own parent, but it need not be the first link after this button because they're not directly related. It's the same as if you sit next to the same person at your desk at work every day, then if someone finds the person who sits next to you, presumably they can then find you because you always sit to the left of that person. If that person moves to somewhere else in the office and then someone comes to look for you to the left of that person, they will no longer find you. Okay? So that's why it's the third method, because the most stable way is to use its own properties or parent properties. If neither of those can be found or can be used, then the next best way is by an anchor, but you have to be aware of the limitations of using an anchor. Okay? And also, unlike with the parent control, I have to actually do this for each of my links individually. Okay? So I have to anchor each link one by one with the anchor control. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and remove the anchors so that I can show you the last two methods. So you see they're all still yellow. So what are the last two ways that I can identify a control? I've already seen own properties, parent properties, anchor, and the fourth way is by image. Okay? So I can actually use the picture, the image of the control, or an image on the screen to help identify my control. Let's take a look at that. If I click on my books link, I again can go to the identification section in the top of the XScan and click on Identify by Image. Okay. Tosca now, because I have scanned the application, it knows where this link was on the page, and it has taken a screenshot of that control on the page. I have to indicate to Tosca which which image from the application I actually want to use to identify that control. I can actually use the exact same picture. So if I go ahead and were to just push enter now, I could use the same picture that Tosca found on its own, which is this area here in red, to identify the book's link. I can also select another area on the screen. If, for example, I know I always want the link that is at the end of that arrow, even if the picture changes, even if the text in the link changes, for example, Tosca will use this image that I'm now creating to identify it and always click on whatever is at the end of that red arrow, whatever link is found there. Okay, so rather than using the book's image itself, it would use the demo web shop and then try to find the link that is located down to the bottom left in this case. Okay, so whichever controls I select will show up in the identifying images. The important thing about identifying images is that they're highly dependent on the screen resolution and the zoom. You can change the accuracy here, so by default it's set to 95% accuracy when it looks for these identifying images. The higher the accuracy, the more likely it is that any small change will cause the image to not be found on the page. And the lower the accuracy, the higher the chance that you pick the wrong image. So you have to be careful here about setting the right level of accuracy. For example, if I took the books link, if the color changes and I have 100% accuracy, then that alone can cause the image to be not found. Okay, so go ahead and close this. The last method of identification of the 5 and the least stable is the identify by index. What identify by index does, so, oops. Sorry. Sorry, I don't know what happened. My screen zoomed in. Just a second.
Okay, just bear with us a second. We're just going to jump in and let Sarah try and fix what has gone wrong on her screen. If you just bear with us for a second. Okay, hang on one second, because Sarah can't actually see what she's doing. You can, but unfortunately we can't. So bear with us 1 second while we try and resolve this issue.
Okay, so if I select a control and I click on Identify by Index, what Tosca does is it tells me it tries to find this control and it gives me its position relative to all other controls with the same properties, so all other similar controls. So in this case, Tosca tells me I'm now going to identify the books link as the first of 2 identical books links on the page. Okay? And then it's unique at the moment of the scan only, because it works as long as these 2 links are in the same order. If the links change order, if this becomes the second of 2 or the third of 10, if the order changes relative to the other controls on the screen, then this index is lost immediately. So if any other identical or similar controls appear or the order changes, then Tosca will no longer be able to locate this exact control. Okay? So I'll go ahead and use the parent control to uniquely identify all of these links. This one changed the name, so I'll quickly change it back to books. There. And I'm going to click Save. Okay. So I've saved my, my module. I go ahead and close the XScan. And I'll switch back into Tosca. And okay, you guys should be able to see now that in my Products Choice tabs, I have a module. I forgot to follow the best practices and rename it, but that's okay. If you forget to rename the root when you're in the XScan, you can always do it once you have already saved it. And so here I will now rename it to something more meaningful like Product Tabs or Product Choice tabs. Just like before, I can see that the module or the Tosca will be looking for the title, the name of the web page, the caption of the website where it found this module. And then once it finds that page, it will search for all the controls on that page. Now this is what's tricky because I want this module to be found on all pages, not just the login page. If you guys look just for a second at the web shop, you can see that at the top of the page, the caption is webshop.login. If I click on another page, it changes to webshop.apparel and so on. Okay, so I want it to be found, this module, because this ribbon is on every single page. I want it to be found on all pages that say demo, web shop, whatever comes after it. To do that, I will modify the property of the module. And I will actually add in an asterisk or a little star, which stands for a wildcard. And a wildcard means that it will search for demo web shop text and all characters after it. So regardless of what characters are after demo web shop, any demo web shop page, Tosca will recognize this control on, or at least look for this control on. And as soon as it locates this module on any demo web shop page, it will then find the controls and be able to steer it. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Tony now for a recap, and then we'll open up for questions.
Okay, so just a very quick recap. So we have, well, I say we, Sarah has discussed that there are 5 main methods of identifying controls by the own properties, so the technical properties, the name, etc., the inner text, by the parent's properties, so that is the element that the control sits within. There is anchor control, so you choose a control that is stable, that you can link it to so that it's linked. Image, so you take a picture and you compare it to another picture. And finally, index, so it's position on the page relative to similar controls. So, how do you create a module? Simple checklist. You scan the application page using the XScan. You select the controls that you wish to have within the module. You uniquely identify each control that you wish to automate. You rename the module, and then you save. Simple as that. So then, questions. Now, we've already had a number of really, really good questions come in. The first one is from Adrian, and he has asked, how, if the scan of the page that I've taken changes, do I really need to rescan my module? Or remake it, or what do I do?
Okay, that's a great question. So the first thing is if a module, if I want to make modifications to a module, first of all, you guys have seen already that I can actually modify properties of a module or of its of the controls within that module here manually. If I can't do it manually, I want to actually rescan, add new controls, or a control can't be found, I don't have to delete the module. I don't have to add an entirely new one. What I can do is right-click on the module itself and select from the list, because once a module is already created, I no longer have the scan application option. Now I have the rescan option. And what rescan does is simply opens up the XScan again, but already with the controls and their properties that I've already selected. So okay, I'm having a problem with
Okay, again, with the computer problems have reared their ugly head again. You should be looking at a lovely picture of the XScan. We will be, hopefully will be shortly. Take this opportunity to say, please keep the questions coming in. Frank is still furiously typing away answering them. Please put in any more that you wish. And so far we're getting to most of them, so please send in your questions. Frank is here for you. So please send in your questions. And hopefully at some point we will work out what has happened to our screen. Okay, while we're working on that, there is actually a question that we can answer just manually. We had a question that came from Alex, and he asked, can test cases using modules scanned in Internet Explorer work in other browsers? Now, in this case, the answer is definitely yes. In most cases, this would work. There wouldn't be any additional work involved. It would just simply work straight out of the box, as it were. It would just be in straight away. So a module that's been scanned in Chrome or Internet Explorer would work in the other Firefox, etc., etc. So they would work. In some rare cases, there may be that you may have to rescan and make some amendments. But that's only on a limited amount of time. So in actual fact, yes, you can scan in Internet Explorer and think that yes, we have the reusability available for other browsers that might work. Okay, we also had a question that came from James asking if we could do one anchor, so have one anchor for multiple links. So the answer to that is sort of yes and sort of no, not directly, but you need to set the anchor to each link one at a time. So when you looked at what Sarah was doing, she was using one anchor. So there was one control, which was the search box, which was being used as the anchor. However, she was putting it and dropping it to multiple controls each time. So it would be one there, dropping it, one there, dropping that. So it wasn't so much, so you can do it, but you have to set the control, the same anchor each time for each control that you wish to do. Okay, we've also had another question. Parents, properties, and anchor control methods look very similar. we use another element to identify the control. Is there a better one than the other? So Frank's going to jump in here.
Yeah, they look very similar. They have definitely the similarities. And I would not say one is better than the other. It always depends on the situation. In some websites, you will not have any diffs or ULs. You will not have any parent controls if the site is not well structured. Then you have to use the anchor. Also, if you use a parent control, you will have an additional control in your module that needs to be chosen, that needs to be maintained if it changes. The anchor control is not in the module when you use it. But the advantage of the parent control is that it's more stable. If the anchor control uses the method of shortest path, then it might be less stable. So it always depends on the situation. Personally, I prefer the parent control, but as I said, it depends on the situation. That's just a personal preference that I have.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Frank, and the rare appearance of the lesser-known Frank there. Okay, so we're still struggling, as you can probably see, you've just got the Tricentis screensaver. We're still struggling a little with the technology, so we may just have to talk from now on, and there might not be any screen, but we are still working on it. So, one thing we have a question of, well, you need to be aware that you need to always, whenever you're doing or scanning your modules, have your browser set to 100% as well. So that's one question. So 100% is the ideal the ideal setting. This way, there would be you would have no errors or anything else. Now, sorry, we're now changing screens, so I'm furiously trying to get rid of all of the things that that are on my screen. So bear with me. Okay, so we are coming close to 5 minutes left now. If anyone wants to try and get their last questions in, now is the time to do so. But it's now my turn to shamelessly plug a few things. So please be aware that the next webinar will be on November the 2nd at 2 o'clock. So at the same time in 2 weeks' time. We will be discussing naming conventions and test case structures. One of the things which is very important when using Tosca is that there is a sensible and a considered way of naming your test cases, naming all the elements within Tosca, your modules and so on and so forth. The reason for this is partly because it makes things easier for yourself to use, but also because with the multi-user functionality, you need your colleagues to be able to look at it. Plus, most projects get big very quickly, and you need to be able to organize themselves so well. So we'll be talking through that. Secondly, at the end of this webinar, there is some feedback. This is hopefully going to be, these few that we're doing now will hopefully be the beginnings of a weekly offering. And so we want to make sure that we tailor them to you to make sure that we're giving you what you want and what you need within these MOOCs. So yeah, I've already seen some people have already mentioned the fact that they would like MOOCs on certain subjects within the survey. There's an option to do that. One of you has already asked for a session on test case design. We can see what we can do and go from there. What I will say, let's have a quick last look at the questions. There doesn't seem to be any which you'd all like to hear about. So, in which case, what I'm going to say is, if you need more help, there are plenty of places where you can get more assistance. Your first place that you should go is the support portal. We have support agents that will be back to you super quickly and will be able to help you really, really fast, either by phone, email, etc., etc. But you can email them at support@tricentis.com. You can always contact us. We're always here to help as well on Academy at Tricentis. But remember, we have this amazing thing called the knowledge base, which is a huge library of questions that have been answered and forums and where you can talk to each other and you can talk to people at Tricentis where we will jump in and help you. Plus, there is an amazing online manual which is updated for whichever version that you're using. You can get that from support at Tricentis. There's a manual there. Communities, we are here to help you is basically the answer. And of course, we don't just have those things. We also have the modern social media era. So if you want to contact us on Facebook, link with us on LinkedIn, or tweet with us at Twitter, you can do so. You will not just find information on Tosca and Tricentis. There also might be some more interesting articles on the wider industry, plus some fun things too as well. So you can always like us on Facebook, link with us on LinkedIn, and you can join our Twitter feed or tweet us at Twitter. So from myself, from Sarah and Frank, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining us. We will be here on November the 2nd for the next one. Please, if you haven't registered, register, and we will see you all on November the 2nd. Thank you very much, and good afternoon.